Golden State Media Concepts bring you Book Review Podcast, a haven for bookworms of all ages and the widest genres, from mystery to memoirs, romance to comedy, fantasy to sci-fi. If you love to read, this is a podcast for you. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast.
Hello and welcome to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. If you haven't done so already, we would love for you to like, subscribe, follow on whatever platform you follow this podcast on. It really does help. I usually say that at the end, but I thought I would mix it up this time and say it at the beginning. Leaving a review is a wonderful way to help get this podcast out to more people. So thank you in advance if you do that. Thank you if you've already done that. It's very, very appreciated. It is another week, another 2 author interviews this week. Very excited about that. It is also feeling like a week full of Mondays already. I was convinced that Sunday was Monday, and then, of course, Monday was Monday, and then it was a very Monday-ish Tuesday. I don't even know what day it is anymore, to be honest with you. I'm very confused, but everything feels like Monday. So I hope that you are having a less Monday-ish week overall than I am having, because it's very discombobulating. But it did give me the opportunity to use the word discombobulating, so I can always enjoy that, right? Author interview. I am very happy to have Yasmin Angoe joining me today to talk about the conclusion of a trilogy. It is a trilogy with a main character whose name is Nena Knight. She is an assassin. She is a complex character, a strong character, a multi-layered character. I really enjoyed this character. It's always interesting to come into a series at the end, but I felt like I was able to read this third book. It's called It Ends with Night. I felt like I was able to read this third book, and while it made me go back to, I would suggest reading them from the beginning. Start with one. I always suggest that, but it's always interesting to come in to the end of a trilogy when you haven't encountered a series before, and I was very happy to meet Nena as a character. Love the way that Yasmin writes her. I'm going to give you the description of the third book, but I'm also going to let you know what all 3 books are called so that you can go look them up. Of course, if you look up Yasmin's name, Yasmin Angoe, then you will be able to find all 3 of those books. They are called Her Name is Night. That's the first one. Second is They Come at Night. And the third, of course, as I've already said, is called It Ends with Night. And Yasmin's last name is spelled Angoe. Yasmin is spelled Yasmin. You'll see that, of course, in the title of this episode, so you'll know how to spell it, so you can look her and the trilogy up. It ends with night. In this thrilling conclusion of the Nena Knight series, the trained assassin will have to confront the ghosts of her past before she becomes one herself. Until his untimely death, Nena's mentor was the backbone of the tribe. With his leadership position unfulfilled, and despite the tribe's newfound misgivings about her, Nena has stepped into a new role she never wanted. Politics is an entirely new venture for her, and now one of the tribe's own has been kidnapped, forcing her back to her origins as an assassin. But the only person qualified for such a rescue mission is Nena Knight, and a new team whose trust in her continues to waver. Determined to harness the power of her former role to succeed in her new one, Nena must also face what she left behind. Old fears, resentments, and anger threaten the precarious hold Nena has on her new life as she realizes that the past and the people from it are never far behind. Again, that is It Ends with Night. It's the third book in this trilogy, starring Nena Knight as the main character, and you can see from that description, from that blurb, that you are going to want to start with book 1. You want to know Nena's backstory, right? You want to know how she came to be in this position where she's now in a new role, but she was an assassin, but she's going back to being an assassin. Why is she an assassin? Why are we rooting for the main character as an assassin, right? It's a thriller. It is got lots of action. I really enjoyed, like I said, haven't read the first two, want to go back and read the first two, maybe listen to the first two on audiobook, because I love a good audiobook. But I do want to go back to Nena's origin story and see what has led to the events of It Ends with Night, because there's a lot of layers there, and Yasmin does a really good job of building Nena as a character, as a fully fleshed character that we do as readers want to root for, even though I don't think in real life I'm going to be rooting for the assassin. I hope not. It's not generally my MO, I don't think. But if you are, of course, if this sounds intriguing to you, then definitely go look up the series. But also take a few moments, not a few moments, it's more than a few moments, take this time, let me just say that, to sit back and listen as Yasmin talks about not only It Ends with Night, but the trilogy as a whole, Nena as the main character, again, why we should root for her, all of those questions. It Ends with Night. Yasmin Angoe is the author. Please sit back and enjoy this conversation. Hello, Yasmin. Welcome to the podcast.
Hi, Sarah. Thank you for having me.
Thank you for being here. I really appreciate it. I am excited to talk about the third book in your trilogy, It Ends with Night, as well as the trilogy itself. But before we talk about the books, please take a few moments to introduce yourself so my listeners can get to know you a bit.
Sure. Hi, I am Yasmin Angoe. I am a Ghanaian-American thriller writer of the Nena Knight series. First one is Her Name is Knight. And I live in South Carolina and used to be a teacher.
And what age did you teach, if I can ask?
Sure. I taught middle and high school, so between the ages of 12 all the way up to 18.
That can be both a really fun age and sometimes kind of a challenging age. What was your favorite thing about middle school?
Oh, goodness gracious. Well, yeah. Okay. So my favorite thing about middle school, is that, they're very entertaining in that, they don't know whether they want to be big kids or little kids sometime. And they have a better, I think, imagination than high schoolers. High schoolers tend to be too cool for school, meaning you introduce something to them and it takes them a minute to kind of warm up to it. But high schoolers also are much deeper thinkers. And so you can really get pretty far with the content, talking literature and things like that. Whereas with middle school, it's kind of like an introduction into things. So, but they're very sweet and open. Some of them, most of them, are very sweet and open to, the classroom and to learning and to reading, writing, all of that.
Yeah, there's pros and cons to any age group, right? But yeah, I like when they're in middle school, they're still willing most of the time to be a little silly, and open to things. So that is fun. But we are here, of course, to talk about books. You mentioned the three books and their names. Can you give an overview of the series first off?
Sure. So, the trilogy as a whole is about Nena Knight. She is a Ghanaian woman, who is an elite assassin for a secret organization called the African Tribal Council, aka the Tribe. The Tribe is comprised of several prestigious and seriously wealthy people from various countries in Africa who have come together with a sole goal, of elevating Africa back to the status that they feel like it needs to be, like a first world continent with first world countries, putting back into her all that has been colonized throughout the centuries, and still taken from her in terms of mining and stuff. So they just want to rebuild her back to her formal glory. And so Nena is on the team of assassins that is called the Dispatch Team. It's a very obvious name because it is basically what they do. They're very unimaginative in that way. And the Dispatch Team helps the tribe dole out punishments to people who they deem are enemies of their cause, people who are trying to hurt or undermine their cause for the people of the African diaspora. And so basically, she takes a detour from a mission to go on a mission of revenge against the people who totally demolished her village and kind of set her on the course to becoming an assassin. She thought they were gone, saw that they're still around. And so she needs to make a decision whether or not she's going to still go by the mission and be that employee who just does what the organization says, or kind of go off on her own and start to put back together all the things that were taken from her. And so the trilogy kind of walks us through her whole entire arc of, being this machine, basically, at the beginning, to being more human and learning the different things, the different aspects of her that are not just being an assassin, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. And, she has that arc through the 3 books. So, which is important for a character, especially the main character. You want to be able to root for them. And it's always interesting when the main character is, quote unquote, a bad guy. I mean, she's an assassin. That's not really a good thing. So can you talk a little bit more about Nena and what about her throughout this character arc is going to make readers root for her as the protagonist?
Sure. So that was the first thing that I really thought about when she started coming to mind. Was I already knew from the beginning that she was going to, I'm not going to say an unlikable, character, because, I hate when they categorize female characters as, oh, I didn't like her or unlikable or anything like that. I wanted her to have an unlikable job. A job that you're not supposed to be able to root for or get into. And the challenge that I gave myself was, how do you make the reader care for someone who actually goes out and kills people, for pay, even though she has a code, and they do have a code that they're very structured and organized. She doesn't go and kill just willy-nilly or whatever like that. But, she still takes lives, right? And she doesn't find any fault in it. And so how do I get the reader to really root for her, not necessarily the job that she does? And so that means really delving into her character, who she was, how she came to be. And so that's the first book. Her Name is Knight is really, I call it her origin story, because you get her before she became an assassin, and you really walk through how she became an assassin step by step. It's told in dual timelines. So her as a 14-year-old, and then her as a 30-something-year-old assassin. And so you kind of go back and forth with that. And I think through that, you really get to learn her character and how ultimately she is a survivor of all these things when people really counted her out, and people, thought she was, gone and dead and all of these things. And she learns, and she protects herself, she saves herself, and she really, becomes this force to be reckoned with later. But also, when you do that kind of thing, when you assume a high position, you lose things in the process, and she suffers a lot of losses. And so the story is also, the trilogy as a whole is also very much about, refilling this empty well that we initially meet her as, and we learn why this well was emptied. And then we walk through her whole progress, her arc of refilling the well with new people, found family, love, and also her own personal growth of what she used to think of herself and how she ends up thinking of herself by the end.
It is time for our first break of this episode, but do keep this conversation in mind now that you know a little bit more about Nena and about the trilogy, because when we come back from the break, we'll be talking a bit more about Nena's origin story, Nena as a character, etc. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I will be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts bring you the Bible Study Podcast. Reflect and journey the Bible as together we study God's Word and be inspired. Bible study made fun and informative for all ages. It's the Golden State Media Concepts Bible Study Podcast.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with author Yasmin Angoe. We, of course, are talking about her Nena Knight trilogy, and she was just speaking about Nena as the protagonist, the main character. Let's go ahead and return now to that conversation. Yeah, and that's a really interesting point of her origin story and trying to get at the reasonings behind why she does what she does, because you get this type of a role and this type of a character with a lot of men in this type of book, right? And so, it's one, good to see not only, a woman in this type of role, but a woman of color, but then people come at those roles differently. Like, why would a woman do this? Why would she do this role? You know, they're more likely, I think, to not like her because she's a woman, whereas a man in the same story, they might not even think twice about it.
They wouldn't. Yep. It would be naturally accept. Oh, okay. Well, if that's what he does, all right. But a woman, yeah, because women, there's that stereotype. We're supposed to be nurturers. We're supposed to be moms. We're supposed to not, think about harming people and being, callous and whatever. And so those are all of the stereotypes, along with stereotypes of, of African people and things like that. Stereotypes of women always needing to be saved, of always being the love interest, always being the super smart person that feeds the information to, the male hero, right? So that he can go and do all the saving. I wanted to flip all of that around and make that a female character, not only a female character, but a female character of color who no one ever, expects to do those kinds of things, who is rarely seen in those spaces. And I wanted to normalize that.
Was that part of your inspiration for the series, was having someone that looks like you in a role of a book that you would enjoy reading?
Absolutely, because I love reading those books. I grew up on those kinds of books, and I watched those kinds of shows, and those kinds of movies. And I mean, of course, I noticed, like with James Bond or Mission Impossible, all of those, it's very much a certain kind of, protagonist that they have. And I didn't see, when I started thinking about Nena, very early on, I didn't see very much of that, on TV, or I definitely wasn't reading very much of that in books, not in thriller books, maybe in, horror, maybe in fantasy a little bit, with some vampire books that I was reading at the time, but like not really something in the genre that I really, really love. And so I thought to myself, why don't you try to write, this person in this genre that you love, doing all these things that you can't absolutely do, but like you don't see it and people don't expect it. So she's just going to come with all these things and do all the things that the guys can do, but, with a different spin.
Yeah. And one thing I liked about It Ends with Night, was that she now has some of that found family that you mentioned earlier, and she is not quite a stepmom, but she's in that role of parenting. She's not terribly good at it, but she's trying.
Trying the hardest she can.
Yeah, and it's the teenage angsty eye rolling phase.
Yeah, she's not used to, to feeling that kind of static from someone. Usually if she tells someone what, they need to do, they just do it. And there's not that, and that's not how she grew up, even though she has an older sister, an older adopted sister, who she probably saw that a little bit with, but she really, Nena is a very cut and dry. She just says what, she thinks, and she's just really a low key kind of person. And so when she deals with that teen angst, she doesn't really know quite how to handle it. And so she just tries the best that she can. She can be very blunt, but then she learns from her errors.
Right. Well, and it's not like she was a typical teenager herself, so she didn't really go through the same experiences.
Exactly.
Yeah. In terms of your characters, especially with Nena and some of the other major characters, how much of a picture of those characters do you have when you sit down to write a new story? And how much do you let evolve as you write?
I try to have a pretty clear grasp of who my characters are going to be, from the beginning, just because I want to know what role they're going to play in the story, how they're going to serve the story. My characters, I don't put them in just to serve, another character. They're in to serve the story in some sort of way. And so I think about that. I think about, my protagonist and what my protagonist has and doesn't have, and what kind of character can address those areas that that main character doesn't have, if that makes any sense, so that there can be that contrast, there can be that play between the two of them, and things like that. It could cause conflict or not. So I really try to have an idea, and it takes me a while to really think about and be settled with a character. The characters also go through many iterations of names. I'll think of a name initially, and then as I'm writing the character and as their personality evolves, I'm like, oh, this name Frank doesn't sound so great for this character. They need to be something else. Maybe they'll be Frederick or something like that. Because to me, names are very important. That's even something that was a big theme in the first book, is names, and all these names that Nena was called, which is also, part of the title of the first, right? With, her name is Knight. Names are a very big thing. Names are a big thing in my culture as well. Like, we take a lot of time trying to decide, like, what is the name and what does it mean, the meanings behind names and things like that. And so my characters also have that when I'm thinking of names for them. And so their names to me is very much part of like their characteristic. And so yes, it's a lot of pre-planning in terms of character, and in terms of like how the story is going to go. And then, the story unfolds. I call myself a discovery writer because I really discover the story and more parts of the characters as it unfolds, and things may change. And that might mean that I have to like make some corrections at the beginning of the story if something flips in the middle, but I don't mind that because I feel like it serves the story even better when I discover things and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's even a surprise to me. I like those kinds of stories and writing.
I like discovery writer better than pantser because it sounds more intentional.
It is, pantser, I get what they mean by that, but honestly, if you talk to an author who says that they're a pantser, they're really not. Everyone has the story in their mind already, whether they actually pen it down on, in extensive outline or not. It's already formulated. A pantser is somebody like, that's more of like a free write session. You really don't know. Someone just gives you, hey, this is the topic, beans, write about beans. And then they start writing about, beans, whatever the first thing is that comes to their mind. That's pantsing because you haven't really thought about it. But when I'm thinking of a story, when most writers, if you ask them, start writing, they already have the concept in their mind. Even if they don't have every bit of it hashed out, they already have an idea. And so that's not really a pantser, because they've already pre-planned. They just haven't put it on paper.
Yeah, makes sense.
Computer, I guess, because most people, I still write on paper. So yeah. Mm-hmm.
My brain is now spiraling about beans. What kind of beans? What are they doing? Why beans?
There's so many beans to talk about.
Beans, that's right. How about research? What types of research did you do for the series? Maybe, I'm sure it was a lot. So maybe what research surprised you?
The research that surprised me, well, for the last one, it was the researching of mining, of the different types of, mining and what, various countries have in place, in terms of mining reformation, in terms of how they deal with the people who actually find those resources, and how it, goes through government, how it goes through private entities that kind of come in and take over, and like what that whole concept is, how many resources, and precious material, precious gems and diamonds, things like that are found in Africa, in Asia, and all these different continents and countries. And the people who find them aren't necessarily the ones who control them, which you would think, right? Because it's your property and things like that. And so like that whole thing, and that goes with like, you know, colonization and outside entities coming in and just kind of like, you know, pilfering all of the resources that a country would have. So like that was very interesting. And I still, you know, there was so much information that there was too much information to put in the book, right? I didn't want to get so very technical. And I also wanted to create my own world, where, you know, some things weren't happening, even though in the real world, they're already happening in terms of Reformation. So there's that, researching different fighting styles and, you know, guns, weapons and things like that were going to be used. So there's so much, you know, research that I do. I talk to people who are experts. I didn't talk to any expert assassins, though that might have been interesting or not. I don't know. It depends on, you know, what they would do with me afterwards. But, you know, like law enforcement, people who practice martial arts and things like that. So there's a lot of research, that goes into it, even for a fictional story, because I kind of want to know what I'm talking about before I'm actually, you know, talking about it. So.
Sure. Yeah. Now I'm just trying to picture how you would even go about finding an assassin to talk to for a book. Like Assassins Are Us. I don't know.
Exactly. Like that would be really interesting if like someone was just like, yeah, but I don't know how that would work out. I'll just be like, you know, I just want to talk to you, but you know, don't kill me afterwards, please. I won't say anything. I just want to know what it's like. You know, I don't know. That would be
I don't think that would go well regardless.
Yeah.
Let's go ahead and take our second break of this episode. When we come back, Yasmin will answer the question of whether or not she is planning on returning to this world and maybe Nena as a character or some of the characters in Nena's world. Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and my conversation with Yasmin Angoe. We are talking about her Nena Knight trilogy. Let's go ahead and return to the conversation. The trilogy is complete, but will you return to this world in future books, do you think?
I would love to return to this world. I absolutely love the world, and I love all of the characters, the good and the bad, that are in it. I would love to do a prequel where it's more about Nena's adoptive parents, Noble and Delphine, and how they even started the organization of the African Tribal Council. I've gotten some questions about that, and you know, everybody wants to know, is this a real like organization and things like that. And I'm like, oh wow, that's really cool that, you know, something that that came up off the top, like people. You know, I wrote it in a way where people thought this could actually be real, because it could be real. Hopefully they wouldn't go and dispatch people actually, but like their concept. And I know that there are companies and things that have that concept of, you know, revitalizing, you know, the countries in Africa and things like that. But yeah, so I would love to do like a prequel. I'd love to do, you know, a spinoff off of some of, you know, the characters, things like that. I'd love to go back into with Nena and how she moves on from the last one. The third book is even left with a little bit of a cliffhanger for just in case, because I just love that world so much. And I've been in that world for so many years. It's hard to, get out of it.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. What do you think, draws you to writing within this genre?
Honestly, the thrill of it, the idea of doing all these things that are not in my everyday life. I mean, I guess that would be in just about any genre that I would write in. But honestly, this is the thing that, this is the genre that really makes me like sit at the edge of my seat. And I'm just like on bated breath, just like, oh my gosh, what's going to happen next? And I wanted to create those kinds of experiences for the people who are reading my books. Not only the experience of like the thrill, right? Or the suspense, or how are they going to stop these big bads from doing these things? But I also am really invested in the character. And so how does this character, this person who has good parts and bad parts to them, even the villains have, good parts to them that are relatable. How do I make, all these characters relate in some way to the reader where they're like, okay, I might not go and like demolish a whole entire city, but I could understand this person being so angry that this thing was taken away from them that they just lash out, and that's the thing that they do, So to me, it's very much not necessarily the method to why, the method of what characters use to do the things that they do, but the motivation, the goal behind it, the thing that drives them to commit these acts. And so those are the things that I always want to explore in my stories, and then also take everyone on a thrill ride while at it.
Yes. Because that just sounds fun, right? I mean, and if
it's just fun.
What are you currently working on?
So I am in the process of revising my next book that's coming out, called Not What She Seems, and it will be out in August of this year, August 6th, I think is what they said. And that is more of a suspense thriller than an action spy espionage thriller, which is what, the Nena Knight trilogy was. This one is more, cat and mouse, Rear Window-esque, if anyone's ever watched those movies. I think there are different versions of it. But it's very, and it's in a small town. It's in a fictional town in South Carolina. And so I'm excited about it because it's a different type of protagonist. It's an everyday protagonist who really, comes up against someone who is unexpected. And so she really must make a go of what she's got, right? In a very non-Nena way, right? And so it was fun, coming off of someone who already knows how to fight and knows how to use weapons and knows strategically how to take care of like the big bad, to someone who has absolutely no idea. And how do they deal with someone who is a big bad?
Right. More like how you and I or the average reader would have to respond in a situation, because most of us, I'm guessing, are not like Nena.
Exactly. I mean, I think this protagonist, Jack is her name. Jack probably does it better than probably I would just run and hide under my desk, maybe. And so Jack is a little bit more, heroic, I think, than I am, but she is a very everyday person. And so I'm excited, to introduce her to the world.
Wonderful. I want to back up just a little bit because the book covers for the Nena trilogy are so bright and beautiful, and 3 different colors for each of the 3 books, but very similar in tone. How much input did you have into the book covers? Can you talk about that process a little bit?
Sure. So I pretty much just kind of told them like what my vision was for what she looks like, and how she would, dress at certain things. So they kind of wanted to know what would she wear? What would her hair be like? What would she look like? And so I sent them like images of that. And my editor is really the driving force behind it, especially behind the colors, because I'm not a decorator in that or a designer in that way. So I was like, whatever you guys decide, like, just, I'm fine with it. I just would like her to look this kind of way. And she, might wear things like this or, does this or whatever. So I had input. They showed me, the makeup of what they had going on. And if something worked, then I would say. If it didn't, then, I would let them know. My agent also, played a role in like talking about, the cover and everything. So it was very much a team effort, but honestly, it is, the Thomas and Mercer team, the designer who put it all together and made Nena in her 3 iterations look very, flawless, and, beautiful in her dresses and things like that. Her facial expressions are very much would be like how Nena is, just a very serious, but beautiful and deadly person. And so very alluring and very, what word am I trying to say? Like, you just don't know what you're going to get with her. Right. So she's a big old question mark. And so I think that the covers really, put that all into effect.
Yeah. Thank you. In terms of your writing career, when is it something you've always wanted to do, or what was your impetus to start writing for publication?
Yeah. So I guess the normal answer that probably all authors would say is I was writing since I was a wee little child. And I was, when I really got into writing was probably middle school. That's where I wrote my first book, that I call it on loose leaf paper with a blue Bic pen. And I still write with a blue Bic pen to this day. My friends tease me about it because it's such a cheap pen, but it's so reliable and I love it. But I really have enjoyed reading since before I can remember. My parents were not together when I was growing up. So my mom worked a lot and worked several jobs. And so I was alone a lot or with babysitters a lot. So it was through reading that I really loved being in those different imaginary worlds and things like that. And I wanted to create that kind of feeling that I was getting from being in all of these imaginary worlds for someone else. So I tried my hand at it with my story, and I realized that I really loved writing, that it was a way for me to get all of my fears and frustrations and concerns out without me having to journal about it, because I've tried journaling and doing diary, and those aren't for me, because I don't want to write about my life that I've already lived. And, I'm like, why do I need to write about it? I've already thought about it, lived it, and whatever. So I'm just going to write a fake world and write about what, these fake people are doing. So that is really what got me into it and what has stayed by me. If I'm not writing, then I'm probably always thinking about something of a story. I'm finding a story in everything. I live a lot of my life in my head and in my imaginary worlds. And sometimes I have to be very intentional to remove myself from those worlds and be in the real world with my family and things like that. They sometimes have to remind me.
Yeah, they shouldn't though. Just leave me in just leave me in the imaginary world. I'm fine. It is time for the final break of this episode. And as we go to that break, let's all think about what imaginary world we want to live in. If you're a writer, what's an imaginary world that you have written that you would really like to inhabit? If you are a reader, what's one of your favorite imaginary worlds that you just want to escape into sometimes and ignore the real world? I have a friend, and we always joke that we have an imaginary fort that we go to. It's like a pillow fort, but way better. It's like a pillow fort meets Narnia meets Hogwarts meets I don't even know how to describe it. We keep adding rooms to it, but what imaginary room or what imaginary world would you inhabit if you could? Stay tuned. You're listening to the GSMC Book Review Podcast, and I'll be right back.
Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. Together we dive into the world of sci-fi and science fiction. From episodes of Star Trek, Star Wars, to The Walking Dead, Resident Evil, all the hot new science fiction movies from the back doors of Marvel or DC. The Golden State Media Concepts Sci-Fi Podcast. You'll never look at science fiction the same way again.
Welcome back to the GSMC Book Review Podcast and the conclusion of my interview with author Yasmin Angoe. As a first-generation American, often there are a lot of expectations for what your career might be. And what does your mom think about you writing?
So my mom, being a first generation Ghanaian American, my parents immigrated here from Ghana to go to school. So they went to Howard University in DC. And so when they come over, they have it in mind what they want you to do. Being a creative is not really a career choice. I think in Ghana, at least it wasn't then, maybe a little bit more so now. But you'll still hear it. And I think any family, probably old school family, would, be like, what does that really mean? What money are you bringing in? So what does she think now? I think she takes it seriously now because she sees the 3 books and she has friends who have read the books and they, love it. So she is surprised, or was pleasantly surprised when they were like, I read your daughter's book and it was so good. Because I think she thought up until that point, even after I got the book deals and the option and everything, she thought it was like a hobby or, not something serious. She thought that I was paying, to have it done, like self-publish or paying people and things like that. So she would always warn me against being scammed, even though that wasn't what was happening. And I was telling her that. But so yeah, now I think she asked me, how are you doing? And she tries to not, bother me when I'm in my writing times and things like that. So she's accepting it. Slowly but surely. She's always accepted it. I guess what I mean is she is taking it more seriously, or she sees that it is actually something that is tangible and real.
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it's just a different mindset, right?
Yeah, exactly. Her mindset is coming around to understanding a creative career as opposed to, being a doctor, a lawyer, or whatever.
Mm-hmm. Sure. Do you have advice for people who are thinking they have a story that they would like to write and put out into the world?
Yeah. My advice is to keep writing. If it's something that you absolutely want to do, nothing is going to stop you from doing it. You can have detours. You can have stop signs, but as long as you come back to it, it's okay. And, also, success looks different for different people. So, I wouldn't compare, and comparison is, a thief of joy, right? So I wouldn't try not to compare yourself to others and their journey. All of our journeys are different. So be content in your journey and be content in what you want to do. And if you really want it, then nothing is really going to stop you. You're going to keep on writing and writing and writing and being able to successfully finish whatever pieces that you're working on. Those are your successes. And eventually, hopefully you'll get that ultimate success that you have envisioned for yourself. But even if not, you have success in completion. You have success in feeling good about what you've written and things like that. So you just, find joy in all the little successes that you have along the way.
Yeah, I think that's important for any path. You have to do it for reasons that make sense to you, not for, anyone else or trying to fit into whatever mold. If you like to write thrillers, but the current popular books are romance, you probably don't want to try to write romance unless you actually enjoy it.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So you've mentioned that you have always loved reading thrillers and these types of action books. When you are reading just for you, who are some of your go-to authors?
Oh, yeah. So some of my go-to authors are like Alyssa Cole, Rachel Halsell Hall, Wanda Morris. Kelly Garrett is always a go-to because I just love her voice that she has in her books. She's hilarious. Tanana Reeve Dew is another one for horror. S.A. Cosby, Nadine Matheson, she's great too. I mean, I just read so many, like the list goes on. And in horror, obviously, Stephen King is someone that, I really love and have enjoyed throughout the years. I've grown up on him and stuff like that. So there's just so many authors that, and so many books out there that my to be read file or list is so long. It's ridiculous.
Oh, I completely understand that. Are you a mood reader or do you stick to your TBR?
I'm a mood reader. And so if I hear something that sounds, good while I'm reading something else, like I'll look it up and I'll add it to my list. I might, bump it to the top if it really sounds like something I want to read right now. And I always have like several books kind of going on at the same time because it also is, depending on, do I want something that's a little bit darker or do I want something lighter and upbeat? Do I want like a little touch of romance or something? It's just, I'll read several at a time and it just depends on how I feel. Yeah.
Yep. Makes sense. In terms of internet presence, if people want to get to know you a little bit more or your books a little bit more, can you give a website and any social media that you're active on?
Sure. My website is yasminangoe.com. You can always contact me through there and it'll shoot me a little email and I'll write you back, especially if you have nice things to say, or whatever. And then I am on Instagram at, I believe it's author_Yas, YAS, on Twitter, or I guess what was formerly known as Twitter, and that is at Yas A Writer. And there's also Facebook, Yasmin Angoe, author on Facebook. So, yep, you can find me in any of those places. I'm around.
Perfect. Thank you. We've talked about a few things today, Yasmin, but is there anything we haven't covered that you want to make sure you highlight?
No, I think we've covered everything. I'm just so excited to be here. I'm glad that you enjoyed It Ends with Night. And thank you again for having me. It is an honor. And so whoever's out there listening, I hope that, you've taken something from what I've said and that encourages you to write or to keep on writing or to not doubt yourself or to pick up a new book if you've never read me before and jump into the world of Nena Knight.
Wonderful. Thank you. And thank you so much for taking the time to talk to me about Nena and the trilogy. I so appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been my pleasure.
Thank you again to Yasmin for talking to me twice. This was one of those crazy things that happens with my schedule sometimes. In this case, it wasn't my schedule. It was a technology fluke and probably a me fluke where we lost the first interview, which is just, I felt terrible about it. Anytime something like this happens and you have to go back to the author and say, I'm so sorry, can we re-record? And she was so gracious and so lovely. But, there's certain points, we had moments in this conversation that were great, but I'm sure that there were just moments of brilliance in that first conversation that now I don't get to share with you. Maybe, maybe not, but I hope that you enjoyed the conversation. If you are a fan of, if you're a fan of those Jack Reacher, Jack Ryan, Tom Clancy type books, but you would like them with a different type of protagonist, in this case, a woman, a woman of color, you're just looking for a different representation in that type of book, then definitely check out this trilogy. It is complete, so you can read all 3 books all at once, which is one of my favorite things, when I can find a series that is complete when I find it. Always wonderful. Definitely check this out. If you know somebody who is looking for a new series to start on, maybe you want to recommend it to them, but find it in your favorite format. I know there's a Kindle version, there's audiobooks. You ask your library if they have them. Go to your local bookstore. There's all sorts of ways you can find these books. So definitely check those out. And thank you so much to Yasmin for joining me twice to share her love of this trilogy, and for Nena as a character. You can tell that she really enjoyed writing the series and creating Nena as a character and the other characters as well. So thank you for that, Yasmin. I hope that you will join me for my next episode. I have a returning author coming back to the podcast. That's what returning means. Come on, get it together, kid. I have a returning author. She was here early on in the process, one of a friend who came onto the podcast. And so I was so excited to have her come back. We had the conversation a couple days ago, and she is a delight. That is Yishan Lai, and we are talking about her new book. It is called A Suffragist's Guide to the Antarctic. Definitely join me for that conversation, and you can find out just exactly what a suffragist is doing, guiding us to the Antarctic, because I'm not going to tell you. You have to come and find out next interview. That will go up on Friday of this week. But, as always, if you've not done so already, please like, subscribe, follow on whatever platform you are listening to this podcast on. When you do that and get notifications, you'll always know when there is a new episode. Then that just takes the guesswork out of it. You will be notified when a new episode goes up. You can also find the podcast on social media. Come find it and me on Facebook, X, Instagram, and TikTok. Love hearing from you. Don't forget that last week's episode had a giveaway, so you can comment on any of last week's social media posts. That's what I'm looking for the interview with Cindy Fazzi, to potentially win a copy of that book, Multo. Thank you, as always, for joining me. I hope you're having a wonderful week so far. My hope for you is the same as it is every time we meet together, and that is for you to have so much time to just go and get yourself lost in a good book. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Book Review Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network, from movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.